Nathan Brooks leaned back in his leather chair, the faint hum of San Francisco's skyline buzzing beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. At 40, he'd built an empire, Brooks Tech, a name that made Silicon Valley tremble and investors salivate. Billions in the bank, a private jet on standby, and a reputation that could open any door. But tonight, like every night for the past 2 years, the penthouse felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The sleek steel and glass, the polished marble floors, the art worth millions, it was all cold, empty, a hollow shell reflecting the man he'd become. 2 years ago, Isabella shattered him. His fiancée, the woman he'd planned to build a life with, walked out without a backward glance. She'd traded him for a flashier billionaire, leaving Nathan with nothing but a diamond ring he'd never given her, and a bitterness that clung like damp fog. He'd thrown himself into work after that, burying the pain under late nights and endless deals. The only thing keeping him tethered to something human was Leo, his 5-year-old son from a fling before Isabella. Leo's laughter was the one sound that still echoed through these walls, a fleeting reminder that life hadn't completely slipped away. Clara Evans had been in his life for a year now, though Nathan barely registered her beyond the basics. She was Leo's nanny, 25, quiet, efficient. She'd slip in each morning with her soft footsteps, her dark hair tied back, and a gentle smile for Leo that Nathan never bothered to notice. To him, she was just part of the machinery of his life, someone who kept things running while he conquered the world outside. He didn't know her dreams, her story, or the way her hazel eyes lit up when she talked to Leo about the stars. He didn't care to know, not then. Tonight, though, something felt off. Nathan loosened his tie as he stepped out of the elevator into the penthouse, the silence pressing against his chest. It was past midnight, and the city lights glittered like a sea of stars beyond the glass. He'd spent the day closing a deal that would net him another $100 million, but the victory tasted like ash. He poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim light, and stood by the window, staring out at a world he owned but couldn't feel. That's when he saw it, a faint glow spilling from the library down the hall. Someone was awake. Nathan Brooks swirled the whiskey in his glass, the ice clinking softly as he stood by the penthouse window. The city sprawled beneath him, a glittering maze of ambition and chaos, but up here it was just him and the silence. At 40, he'd climbed higher than most men dared to dream. CEO of Brooks Tech, a titan in the tech world, his name whispered in boardrooms and splashed across headlines. He had everything, a fortune that could buy islands, a penthouse that screamed power, a private chef who knew his every quirk. Everything except the one thing he'd lost 2 years ago. Isabella's betrayal still burned, a wound that wouldn't heal. He could still see her standing in this very room, her blonde hair catching the light as she tossed his engagement ring onto the coffee table like it was trash. "I need more than this, Nathan," she'd said, her voice cold as steel. "More than you." She'd left him for a real estate mogul with a yacht and a smirk, and Nathan had watched her go, too stunned to fight. That night, he'd stood right here, staring out at the same skyline, feeling his heart calcify. Love was a liability, he'd decided, a weakness he couldn't afford again. Since then, he'd rebuilt his life around two things, work and Leo. His son was a whirlwind of energy, all messy brown curls and bright blue eyes, a living echo of a brief romance before Isabella. Leo was 5 now, and Nathan clung to him like a lifeline. He'd hired Clara Evans a year ago to look after him, some quiet girl with a resume that checked out and a knack for keeping Leo happy. She'd fade into the background, just another cog in the machine of his meticulously controlled existence. Nathan didn't know her favorite color or where she'd grown up. He didn't ask. She was there to make his life easier, nothing more. The penthouse itself was a masterpiece. Open plan, all sharp lines and modern elegance. The living room stretched wide with a sunken sofa facing a massive TV, a bar stocked with top-shelf liquor, and a dining table that could seat 20, but never did. Beyond that, a hallway led to Leo's room, the guest suites, and the library, a space Nathan rarely used, lined with books he'd bought for show. It was a home built for a life he no longer lived, a monument to the man he'd been before Isabella gutted him. Tonight, though, the emptiness felt heavier. Nathan had spent the day in a glass tower downtown, signing off on a deal that would push Brooks Tech into the stratosphere. Another win, another zero in his bank account. He'd driven home in his matte black Tesla, the hum of the engine filling the void where conversation used to be. Now, standing here with his drink, he felt the familiar ache creeping in, a hollow space no amount of money could fill. He tried to drown it in work, in whiskey, in the relentless pace of his life, but it lingered, a shadow he couldn't shake. Clara was probably asleep by now, he figured. She stayed in a small room off the kitchen, close enough to hear Leo if he woke up. Nathan didn't know much about her beyond that. She was 25, young enough to still have dreams, old enough to know the world wasn't kind. She'd started working for him after answering an ad his assistant posted. Something about needing someone reliable, discreet, good with kids. Clara fit the bill. She'd show up every day in simple clothes, her dark hair pulled back, her hazel eyes soft but guarded. She'd play with Leo, read him stories, tuck him in. Nathan would nod at her in passing, maybe mutter, "Thanks," if he was feeling generous. That was it. He took a sip of whiskey, the burn sliding down his throat, and glanced at the clock on the wall. 12:37 a.m. Leo would be out cold, dreaming of superheroes or whatever 5-year-olds dreamed about. The penthouse should have been dark, silent, the way it always was this late. But that light from the library nagged at him. It wasn't bright, just a soft spill creeping under the door, but it was enough to pull him out of his thoughts. He set the glass down on the bar, the clink echoing in the stillness, and loosened his tie a little more. Maybe Leo had left a lamp on. Maybe Clara had forgotten to switch it off. Either way, he'd check it out. Nathan crossed the living room, his polished shoes tapping faintly against the marble floor. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with sleek sconces casting a dim glow. He passed Leo's room, door cracked, a sliver of moonlight spilling out, and kept going. The library door was ajar, and as he got closer, he heard it, a faint rustle, like pages turning. His brow furrowed. Leo couldn't be up this late, and Clara had no reason to be in there. He pushed the door open wider, stepping into the room, and froze. There she was, Clara, sitting at the long oak table, a textbook spread out in front of her. A single lamp cast a golden pool of light over her, illuminating the dark waves of her hair spilling over her shoulders. She was hunched over the book, her slender fingers tracing lines of text, her lips moving silently as she read. She didn't hear him come in, didn't notice him standing there watching her. For the first time, Nathan really saw her, not as the nanny, not as a shadow in his house, but as something else entirely. Something that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. Nathan Brooks stood in the doorway of the library, his breath catching as he watched Clara Evans hunched over her book. The soft glow of the lamp painted her in warm tones, her dark hair falling loose over her shoulders, framing a face he'd never truly looked at before. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, the kind of outfit that blended into the background of his polished world. But right now, under that light, she looked anything but ordinary. Her hazel eyes flickered with focus, her brows knitting slightly as her fingers traced the page. She was lost in whatever she was reading, oblivious to the fact that he was standing there, staring. The library itself was a relic of a life Nathan no longer lived. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stuffed with leather-bound books he'd bought to impress guests, a room he rarely stepped into. But Clara had claimed it tonight, turning it into something alive. A stack of textbooks sat beside her, a notebook scribbled with neat handwriting, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She wasn't just passing time. She was working, studying, chasing something. Nathan's eyes narrowed, curiosity tugging at him. What was she doing up this late? And why here in his house, surrounded by his things? He cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the stillness like a blade. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise as they locked onto his. For a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Startled, vulnerable. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice soft but unsteady, a faint flush creeping up her cheeks. She scrambled to close the textbook, her hands fumbling as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. "I didn't hear you come in." Nathan stepped into the room, his hands slipping into his pockets as he studied her. Up close, she was even more striking than he'd realized. Her skin had a warm glow, her hazel eyes catching the light in a way that made them shimmer. She wasn't wearing makeup, didn't need it. Her beauty was quiet, unassuming, the kind that snuck up on you. "You're studying," he said, his tone more observation than question, though there was an edge of surprise he couldn't hide. Clara nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry if I bothered you. I didn't think anyone would be up." Her voice was gentle, almost apologetic, but there was a spark in it, something determined, like she wasn't just here to explain herself away. Nathan tilted his head, his gaze drifting to the book she'd been reading. Principles of Economics. Not light reading, not something you'd pick up for fun. "You've been here a year, and I didn't know you were in school," he said, his voice low, almost to himself. He took another step closer, the faint scent of her lavender shampoo hitting him as he stopped by the table. Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the book. "It's not something I talk about much," she admitted, her eyes dropping to her lap. "I'm taking online classes, trying to get my degree in economics. It's slow going, with work and all." Nathan raised an eyebrow, leaning against the table's edge. "Economics? That's not easy. Why?" He didn't mean to sound so blunt, but the question slipped out before he could soften it. He wasn't used to caring about the answers people gave him. He hadn't cared about much in a long time. Clara's lips pressed into a small, determined line, and when she looked up at him, there was fire in her eyes. "I don't want to be a nanny forever," she said quietly. "No offense to Leo, he's amazing. But I want more. I want to build something for myself, something better than this." She gestured vaguely at the room, though Nathan knew she meant her life, not his penthouse. Her words hit him harder than he expected. There was a hunger in them, a raw ambition he recognized because he'd lived it once, back when he was clawing his way up from nothing. He'd forgotten what that felt like, the drive, the late nights, the belief that you could change your fate. He'd buried it under layers of cynicism and success. But here was Clara, sitting in his library at midnight, chasing that same spark. "You're up pretty late for that," he said, his voice softening despite himself. He nodded at the clock on the wall. 1:03 a.m. Now. "Don't you ever sleep?" She smiled, just a little, and it was the first time he'd noticed how it lit up her face. "I could ask you the same thing, Mr. Brooks. You're the one coming home past midnight." He chuckled, a low, rusty sound he hadn't heard from himself in ages. "Fair point." He straightened up, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than he meant to. She was beautiful. Not in the loud, polished way Isabella had been, but in a way that felt real, grounded. The sweater hugged her frame just enough to hint at the curves beneath, and her hair fell in soft waves that made him want to reach out and touch it. He didn't, of course. He wasn't that guy anymore. "You look..." He paused, searching for the right word, then settled on the truth. "You look good doing this. Focused. It suits you." The compliment slipped out before he could stop it, and he saw her cheeks flush again, deeper this time. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced down at her book, then back up at him, her gaze catching his and holding it. For a moment the air between them felt heavier, charged with something neither of them could name. Nathan stepped back, breaking the spell. "Don't let me keep you," he said, turning toward the door. "Good luck with the studying." But as he walked away, her image stuck with him. Clara, the nanny he'd overlooked, sitting there with her books and her dreams, lighting up a corner of his cold, empty world. Nathan Brooks couldn't shake the image of Clara from his mind. That night in the library had cracked something open inside him, a sliver of light piercing the dark fortress he'd built around himself. Over the next few days, he found himself noticing her in ways he never had before. The way she knelt beside Leo in the living room, helping him piece together a Lego spaceship. Her laughter soft and genuine, the way her hazel eyes crinkled when she smiled at his son, or how she'd hum quietly while folding Leo's tiny clothes. She'd been there all along, a steady presence in his chaotic life, and he'd been too blind or too broken to see it. He started lingering in the penthouse more, cutting his late nights at the office short. It wasn't a conscious decision at first, just a pull he couldn't explain. He'd come home while the sun was still dipping below the horizon, the sky streaked with orange and pink, and find Clara there, reading to Leo, cooking something simple in the kitchen, or tidying up the toys scattered across the rug. She'd glance up at him, offer a shy "Hi, Mr. Brooks," and he'd nod back, feeling a strange warmth settle in his chest. One evening, about a week after the library moment, Nathan walked in to find Clara and Leo sprawled on the floor, surrounded by a mess of plastic gears and bolts. Leo's latest obsession was a robot building kit, and Clara was right there with him, her dark hair falling into her face as she twisted a screwdriver. "Almost got it," she murmured, her voice steady with focus. Leo giggled, clapping his hands as the little robot's arm jerked to life. Nathan dropped his briefcase by the door and loosened his tie, watching them. "You're good at that," he said, stepping closer. His voice sounded rougher than he meant it to, but Clara didn't seem to mind. She looked up, brushing her hair back with a quick smile. "It's not that hard once you figure out the instructions. Leo's the real genius here." She ruffled his son's curls, and Leo beamed, scooting closer to her. "Clara says I'm going to be an inventor," Leo chirped, holding up the robot proudly. Nathan crouched down beside them, his knees brushing the rug. "Is that right? Well, you've got a good teacher." He glanced at Clara, catching her eye, and she blushed, ducking her head. Up close, he could see the faint freckles dusting her nose, the way her lashes framed those hazel eyes. She was beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention. It just pulled you in, quiet and undeniable. They worked on the robot together for a while, Nathan fumbling with the tiny pieces while Clara guided him with patient hands. Their fingers brushed once, just for a second, and Nathan felt a jolt, like static, sharp and unexpected. Clara pulled back quickly, her cheeks pink, and he pretended not to notice, focusing on tightening a screw. But his pulse was racing, and he couldn't ignore the heat creeping up his neck. When Leo finally yawned and rubbed his eyes, Clara stood to take him to bed. "I'll be right back," she said softly, scooping the boy up. Nathan watched her go, her silhouette disappearing down the hall, and realized he didn't want her to leave. Not yet. He busied himself picking up the scattered parts, waiting for her to return. She did a few minutes later, her sweater sleeves rolled up, her hair a little messier from wrestling Leo into his pajamas. "He's out like a light," she said with a small laugh, leaning against the doorway. "That robot wore him out." Nathan straightened up, holding a gear between his fingers. "You're good with him, better than I am most days." He meant it. Leo adored her, and Nathan couldn't remember the last time his son had looked at him with that kind of trust. Clara shrugged, stepping into the room. "He's easy to love. You're not so bad yourself, you know." He talks about you all the time. Daddy's the smartest guy in the world." She mimicked Leo's high-pitched voice, and Nathan chuckled, the sound easing some of the tension in his shoulders. They stood there for a moment, the air between them softening. Nathan set the gear down and took a chance. "You're pretty incredible, Clara. Not just with Leo, with everything. The studying, the way you keep going. It's rare." Her eyes widened, and she tucked her hands into her pockets, shifting her weight. "Thanks, Mr. Brooks. That means a lot." Her voice was quiet, but there was a tremor in it, like she wasn't used to being seen. "Call me Nathan," he said, surprising himself. "You've been here a year. I think we're past the Mr. Brooks stage." She smiled, a real one this time, and it hit him like a punch to the gut. "Okay, Nathan?" The way she said his name, soft and careful, made something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt since before Isabella. He stepped closer, close enough to see the way her breath hitched. "You're beautiful, you know that?" The words slipped out, raw and unfiltered, and he saw her freeze, her cheeks flushing deep red. "Nathan, she faltered, looking away, then back at him. I've never—" She stopped, biting her lip, and he frowned, waiting for her to finish. "Never what?" he asked gently, his voice low. Clara took a shaky breath, her eyes meeting his with a mix of nerves and honesty. "I've never been with anyone, not like that. I've been too busy. Working, studying, trying to keep my head above water. There's never been time for anything else." Her confession hung in the air, fragile and unguarded. Nathan's heart thudded hard against his ribs. He'd expected a lot of things, but not this kind of innocence from someone who carried herself with such quiet strength. It wasn't just her words, it was the way she said them, like she was handing him a piece of herself she'd kept hidden. He reached out, his hand brushing her arm, light enough that she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't. "That's nothing to be ashamed of," he said, his voice rough with something he couldn't name. It's kind of amazing, actually. You're amazing." Clara's lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes searched his, and for the first time in years, Nathan felt seen too. Not as the CEO, not as the man with the broken past, but as himself. And in that moment, he knew he was in trouble. Because Clara Evans was starting to unravel every wall he'd spent 2 years building. Nathan Brooks couldn't get Clara out of his head. That night by the Lego-strewn rug had shifted something fundamental inside him, like a gear clicking into place after years of grinding. He'd spent the last week finding excuses to be around her, helping with Leo's bedtime stories, lingering over coffee in the kitchen while she prepped breakfast, asking about her economics classes just to hear her voice light up with passion. She'd started calling him Nathan without hesitation now, and every time she did, it felt like a small victory, a crack widening in the armor he'd worn since Isabella walked out. Clara was a puzzle he couldn't stop trying to solve. She was 25, young enough to dream big, but there was a weight to her, a quiet resilience that hinted at a story she hadn't told him. He'd catch her staring out the penthouse windows sometimes, her hazel eyes distant, like she was looking at a life she'd lost. He wanted to know more, to peel back the layers she kept so carefully tucked away, and the more he learned, the deeper he fell. Her laugh, her gentle way with Leo, the way she'd blush when he caught her off guard. It was all pulling him in, whether he liked it or not. It was late on a Friday when everything unraveled. Nathan had come home early, the city lights just starting to flicker on beyond the glass. Leo was already asleep, and Clara was in the library again, her usual spot. She'd left her bag open on the table, a worn leather satchel she carried everywhere. And as Nathan passed by, something caught his eye, a corner of a photograph sticking out, creased and faded. He didn't mean to snoop. He'd only meant to set the bag up right so it wouldn't spill, but his fingers brushed the photo and curiosity got the better of him. He pulled it out, his breath catching as he stared at the image. Two girls, one blonde and older, one dark-hilled and younger, standing in front of a sprawling mansion. The blonde was unmistakable. Isabella. Her sharp cheekbones and cold smile burned into his memory. The younger one, maybe 15 or 16, had softer features. Hazel eyes, a shy tilt to her mouth. It was Clara. Younger, but undeniably her. Nathan's stomach dropped, the room tilting as his mind raced to connect the dots. He didn't hear Clara come back until her voice cut through the haze. "Nathan? What are you—" She stopped dead, her eyes locking on the photo in his hand. The color drained from her face, and she took a step back, her breath hitching. "Where did you get that?" Nathan turned to her, the photo trembling slightly in his grip. "It was in your bag." "Clara, what is this? Why do you have a picture with Isabella?" His voice was low, but there was an edge to it, a mix of confusion and something darker, something he couldn't name yet. Clara's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening with sudden tears. I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered, her voice breaking. She sank into a chair, her shoulders curling inward like she was trying to disappear. "I'm so sorry." "Find out what?" Nathan's heart pounded, a sick feeling twisting in his gut. He stepped closer, the photo still clenched in his hand. "Clara, talk to me. What's going on?" She took a shaky breath, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Isabella's my sister," she said, the words spilling out like they'd been trapped too long. "My older sister. We grew up together. Me, her, our parents. We had everything back then, a big house, fancy cars, private schools. My dad owned a construction company and it was huge. I thought that was how life would always be." Nathan stared at her, his mind reeling. Isabella's sister? The woman who'd ripped his heart out and left him bleeding had a sister sitting in his penthouse caring for his son? He opened his mouth to speak, but Clara kept going, her voice trembling but steady. "Then it all fell apart," she said. "6 years ago, my dad trusted Isabella with a big investment, some real estate deal she swore would make us richer. She was wrong. It tanked, and we lost everything. The company, the house, our savings. My parents were devastated. Dad had a heart attack a year later and didn't make it. Mom's still picking up the pieces, living in a tiny apartment upstate. Isabella just walked away, found some rich guy to latch onto, and never looked back." Clara's eyes met his now, wet and raw. "That's why I'm here, Nathan. I've been on my own since I was 19, working whatever jobs I could find to pay for school, to build something better. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd hate me. You'd see her in me, and I couldn't—" Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands, sobs shaking her shoulders. Nathan's world spun. He dropped the photo onto the table, his hands clenching into fists. Isabella's sister. The betrayal flashed through him again, her cold dismissal, the way she'd tossed him aside like he was nothing. And now Clara, this woman he'd started to care about, was tied to her. He turned away, pacing to the window, his breath fogging the glass. Anger surged, hot and familiar, but beneath it was something else. Pain, confusion, a desperate need to understand. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "All this time, Clara, you've been here and you didn't say a word." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Because I was afraid you'd fire me. Or worse, that you'd look at me and only see her. I'm not Isabella, Nathan. I hate what she did to you. I saw how it broke you. She bragged about it once, when I tried to reach out to her after Dad died. I cut her off after that. I swear, I'm not like her." He turned back to her, searching her face. Those hazel eyes, so different from Isabella's icy blue ones, pleaded with him. There was no calculation there, no cruelty, just honesty, raw and unguarded. He thought of the late nights she'd spent studying, the way she'd poured herself into Leo, the quiet strength she carried. She wasn't Isabella, she was Clara, someone who'd fought her way through hell and still found a way to be kind. Nathan's anger ebbed, replaced by a hollow ache. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, his hands hovering before settling on her arms. "I don't hate you," he said, his voice rough but firm. I need a minute to process this. But I don't see her in you, Clara. I see you." She blinked at him, tears clinging to her lashes. "You mean that?" He nodded, his thumb brushing her arm. "Yeah, I do." He stood, pulling her up with him, and for a moment they just stood there, the weight of her secret settling between them. Nathan's mind churned, but his heart was telling him something he wasn't ready to admit yet. Clara wasn't his past. She might just be his future. Nathan Brooks spent the next few days wrestling with the truth Clara had laid bare. Isabella's sister. The words looped through his mind, dragging up old ghosts he'd thought he'd buried. But every time he looked at Clara, really looked at her, he saw something Isabella never had. Warmth, honesty, a quiet strength that didn't need to shout to be felt. She wasn't the woman who'd broken him. She was the one picking up pieces he didn't even know were still scattered. He watched her more closely now, not out of suspicion, but something softer, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. The way she'd sit with Leo on the penthouse balcony, pointing out constellations while his son's eyes sparkled with wonder. The way she'd catch Nathan's gaze across the room and offer a small, hesitant smile, like she was testing the waters after her confession. She hadn't pulled away since that night in the library, hadn't run from the mess of his reaction. She'd stayed, steady and unshaken, and that alone was enough to chip away at the last of his defenses. It was a crisp Thursday evening when Nathan made up his mind. He'd come home early again, the city skyline glowing gold and purple as the sun dipped low. Leo was with his grandmother for the night. Nathan's mom had insisted on a sleepover, and the penthouse felt quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that begged for something to fill it. Clara was in the kitchen rinsing dishes, her dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She didn't hear him come in, didn't see him standing there, watching her with a knot tightening in his chest. "Clara," he said, his voice low but firm. She turned, startled, a wet plate slipping slightly in her hands before she caught it. "Nathan," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I didn't expect you back so soon. Is everything okay?" Her hazel eyes searched his face, a flicker of worry creasing her brow. He nodded, stepping closer. "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. Can you come with me for a minute?" He didn't wait for an answer, just tilted his head toward the balcony doors and started walking. She followed, her footsteps soft behind him, curiosity humming in the air. The balcony stretched wide, a sleek slab of glass and steel overlooking San Francisco's glittering sprawl. The night was cool, a breeze tugging at Clara's hair as she stepped out beside him. Nathan leaned against the railing, his hands gripping the cold metal, gathering his thoughts. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of possibilities stretching out as far as he could see. He turned to her, and the way the moonlight caught her face, softening her features, making her eyes glow, nearly knocked the breath out of him. "I've been thinking about what you told me," he started, his voice rough around the edges. "About Isabella, your family, everything. It threw me, I won't lie. I spent 2 years hating her, shutting out anything that reminded me of that time. And then you come along and you're her sister, but you're nothing like her." Clara's lips parted, but she didn't speak, just watched him with those wide, steady eyes. Nathan took a step closer, closing the gap between them. You're not my past, Clara. You're something else, something I didn't see coming. You've been here, right under my nose, and I was too stubborn to notice how much you matter. To Leo, to this house, to me. Her breath hitched, and he saw her hands tremble slightly at her sides. Nathan, I don't know what to say. I never meant to. He cut her off, his voice softening. You don't have to say anything yet. Just listen. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing the small velvet box he'd been carrying all day. His heart pounded as he pulled it out, and when he sank to one knee, Clara's gasp was sharp enough to slice through the night. Nathan, what? Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening as he opened the box. Inside, a diamond ring sparkled. Simple but stunning, the stone catching the moonlight like a captured star. Marry me, Clara, he said, looking up at her with everything he had left to give. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But I also know you've brought me back to life. You walked into my world when I was cold and closed off, and you made me feel again. I don't care where you came from or what happened before. I care about you. About us. Clara stared at him, tears welling up, her chest rising and falling fast. Nathan, I'm the nanny. I'm nobody. You're you, successful, powerful. I don't deserve. You're everything, he interrupted, standing now but keeping the ring between them. You think I care about titles, about what people might say? I've spent my life chasing things that don't matter, money, status, deals. But you, Clara, you're real. You're the one thing I can't let slip away. She shook her head, tears spilling over. I'm scared, Nathan. What if I'm not enough? What if this falls apart like everything else in my life? He stepped closer, his free hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. You're enough. You've always been enough, and I'm not going anywhere. I'll fight for this, for you, every damn day if I have to. Just say yes, let me give you the life you deserve. Clara's eyes searched his, her breath shaky as the wind tugged at her hair. For a moment he thought she might pull away, that the weight of her past would win. But then her hands lifted, trembling, and rested against his chest. Yes, she whispered. So soft he almost missed it. Then louder, stronger. Yes, Nathan. I'll marry you. Relief crashed through him and he slid the ring onto her finger, the diamond gleaming against her skin. He pulled her into his arms, her body fitting against his like it was made to be there. She clung to him, her tears soaking into his shirt, and he buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. Lavender and warmth and hope. When he tilted her chin up and kissed her, it was slow and deep, a promise sealed under the stars. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, then yielding, and Nathan knew he'd never let her go. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the city humming below them. For the first time in years, Nathan felt whole. Not because of what he'd built, but because of who he'd found. 3 years had slipped by since that night on the balcony, and Nathan Brooks barely recognized the man he'd become. The penthouse was gone, traded for a sprawling house just outside San Francisco, nestled among rolling hills and oak trees. It wasn't as sleek or cold as the glass tower he'd once called home. This place had warmth, a wide porch with rocking chairs, a backyard where wildflowers spilled over the edges, and a wooden swing where Leo spent hours pretending to be a pilot. The city still glittered in the distance, but Nathan didn't need its pulse anymore. He'd found a new rhythm here, with Clara. The house hummed with life now. Leo, 8 years old and growing like a weed, raced through the halls, his laughter bouncing off the walls. He'd taken to Clara like she'd always been there, calling her mom without a second thought long before the wedding. Nathan had watched it happen, his chest swelling with something he hadn't known he could feel again. Pride, love, a quiet kind of peace. Clara had slipped into their lives so seamlessly, filling gaps Nathan hadn't even realized were there. Tonight, the sun was sinking low, painting the sky in hues of gold and lavender. Nathan stood in the kitchen, pouring a glass of iced tea, when he caught sight of Clara through the window. She was in the garden, kneeling beside a patch of roses she'd planted last spring. Her dark hair spilled over her shoulders, catching the light, and her hands moved gently over the petals, checking them with the same care she gave everything: Leo, the house, him. She was wearing a loose sundress, the fabric stretching slightly over the curve of her belly. 5 months pregnant now, and every time Nathan saw her like that, his heart did a slow, heavy flip. He stepped outside, the screen door creaking behind him, and walked over to her. She looked up as he approached, her hazel eyes softening with a smile. "Hey," she said, brushing dirt off her hands. "Didn't hear you come out." Nathan crouched beside her, setting the tea on the grass. "You gonna turn this place into a jungle at this rate?" he teased, nodding at the roses. "Leo's already planning a fort out here." Clara laughed, the sound light and easy. "He'd love that. You'd build it for him too, wouldn't you?" "In a heartbeat," Nathan said, grinning. He reached out, his hand settling over hers where it rested on her knee. Her skin was warm from the sun, and he felt that familiar pull, the one that had started in the library years ago and never let go. "How are you feeling?" "Good," she said, her free hand brushing her belly. "Tired, but good. This one's a kicker, though. Keeps me up half the night." Nathan's gaze dropped to her stomach, his throat tightening. "Our little troublemaker," he murmured, sliding his hand over the swell. He felt a faint nudge against his palm, and his grin widened. "Already taking after Leo?" Clara's smile turned softer, her eyes shimmering in the fading light. "Or you, stubborn and full of energy." She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, and Nathan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. The scent of roses and her lavender shampoo filled the air, grounding him in a way nothing else ever had. They stayed like that for a while, watching the sun dip below the hills. Leo's voice drifted from inside the house. He was probably raiding the cookie jar again, and the world felt right, whole. Nathan pressed a kiss to Clara's temple, his lips lingering against her skin. "You've given me everything, you know that?" he said, his voice low and rough. "This house, Leo, the baby, you. I didn't think I'd ever have this." Clara tilted her head to look at him, her hand finding his. "You gave me just as much," she said quietly. "I was lost when I came here, Nathan, barely holding it together. You saw me, really saw me, and you didn't let my past define me. That's more than I ever dreamed of." He shook his head, his thumb tracing circles over her knuckles. "Your past didn't scare me off. It made me want you more, made me see how strong you are. I was the one who needed saving, Clara. You pulled me out of that hole I dug myself into." Her eyes glistened, and she squeezed his hand. "We saved each other then." "Yeah," he said, his voice thick. "We did." He leaned down, kissing her slow and deep, tasting the sweetness of her lips and the promise they'd built together. When he pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, her breath a little uneven, and he couldn't help but smile. "I love you," he said, the words as natural now as breathing. "You and Leo and this little one, you're my whole damn world." "I love you too," she whispered, her hand resting over his heart. "Always." They stood together, his arm around her waist, her head against his chest, as the last of the sunlight faded. Inside, Leo called out, "Dad! Clara, can I have one more cookie?" And they both laughed, the sound mingling with the evening breeze. "Go tell him no more sugar before bed," Clara said, nudging Nathan with a grin. "You're the tough guy here." Nathan chuckled, kissing her forehead before heading inside. "Only because you've got me wrapped around your finger," he called back, and her laughter followed him through the door. Later, As the stars blinked to life above the house, Nathan stood on the porch, watching Clara tuck a blanket around Leo on the couch. She was his wife, his partner, the mother of his kids, the family he'd never thought he'd deserve, and as she glanced up at him, her smile soft and sure, he knew he'd spend the rest of his life making sure she felt as loved as she'd made him. Forever wasn't just a word anymore. It was them, right here, in the home they'd built from the ashes of their pasts.